What's good, everybody? I am back with a bit of an ode to clay court season, swan song, if you will, to this year's clay court season. Obviously, we are in the midst of the beginning of grass court season, already through to the quarterfinals, I believe, in Stuttgart and Schertagenbosch. But I had been teasing this video for a very long time, and throughout clay court season, I was intent on doing it at some point, and if you aren't familiar with the concept of this video, I already did one on ranking the Australian Open champions of the 2010s, one of my earliest videos on this channel actually. I will link it in the description for those of you interested on catching up on that one if you didn't get to watch it, but in the interest of getting this video out of the way, it's well overdue. I will be ranking the 2010s French Open champions. Same kind of deal here in how I'll be assessing these rankings. I'll be basing it off of dominance and form, quality of opposition, and of course eye test. It goes without saying that making these rankings are very subjective. There's no real absolute science about it. I do expect most people to have a different list than mine, and you are free to leave those in the comments below. But this, of course, is how I viewed the 2010s Roland Garros champions, and you better believe I am excited as all hell to just recollect on a lot of dominant Rafael Nadal runs at the French Open. So without further ado, let us just hop into this list. At number 10, I have 2018 Rafael Nadal. This run to me pretty unremarkable in hindsight, pretty standard stuff. If you ask me, in 2018, Nadal really peaked on clay early in Monte Carlo and Barcelona. That was kind of just a continuation of 2017 Roland Garros. As far as the French alone was concerned, in 2018, Nadal was a bit shaky early on, almost had to go to a fourth set against Simone Bolelli in the first round, and really wasn't all that sharp early, only got the wake-up call once he went down a set and a break to Diego Schwartzman, who I think played the best of his matches where he always seems to peak against Rafa in slams. But then again, it was still David versus Goliath. I never really thought, even if Nadal went down 2-0 in that match, that he was actually going to lose. There were a couple rain delays here or there in that match, ultimately had to be postponed to the next day. Nadal was already on his way back, but upon the next day's resumption, he got his wake-up call, as I said, was much sharper the remainder of this tournament. Schwartzman probably put up the best fight even on the next day, but no match for Rafa once he was zoned in. Last two matches got what you were expecting pretty much. Neither Del Potro nor Thiem really had anything for Rafa once he was dialed in after this match, and he routined both of them. These were two very clean performances. Nadal didn't really put a foot wrong, but again, he really only turned up his intensity in this tournament for 2.5 matches, and aside from that was pretty unremarkable, so I can't put this one any higher than number 10. Pretty run-of-the-mill standard Roland Garros title run for Rafa. Up next at number 9, I have 2016 Novak Djokovic. In what was perhaps the culmination of the greatest run of dominance tennis had seen, Novak Djokovic finally captured that coveted French Open title that had eluded him through an already first ballot Hall of Fame career. The stark contrast of receiving the runners-up trophy in tears a year ago to now, a year later, holding all 4 slams in a year's span had to be one of the sweetest moments of Novak Djokovic's career. That being said, as historic a win as this was, I can't put it up any higher for this decade. Djokovic's 2016 French Open campaign was pretty regulation stuff for him relative to the standards of that 2015 to first half of 2016 warpath that he was on. There was some bit of intrigue since that summer it seemed like Rafa Nadal was emerging from a long slump and finally finding his footing again, but when he went down with a wrist injury early in the French, It seemed like this was kind of a formality for Novak. For the most part, he didn't really have to exert himself or go to another level, but he did impress in his last 3 matches, particularly his last 2 against Dominic Thiem and Andy Murray. I think that semi against Thiem is among the best matches Djokovic has ever played on clay. And then in the final, he came out a bit tight, but Murray, even in the clay form of his life, simply couldn't elevate to the level that Djokovic did after the first set, and he rode that to breeze to his first ever French Open crown. Up next at number 8 is a run that I really didn't think I would have to have this low until I really thought about it, and is one that is one of my personal favorites in 2019, Rafael Nadal. This is one of the few tournaments that I think post-prime Nadal really played at an all-time great level, and didn't seem like it was always going to be that way with how clay court season went, as Nadal for the first time in a while again was having trouble finding his footing on clay during the clay court season. However, Rome came and somehow, out of the blue seemingly, a top-tier Nadal re-emerged. That continued into the French Open. I think that aside from David Goffin playing some of the best tennis I've ever seen him play in their 3rd round match to take a set, Nadal was pretty much untested, laid some demolition jobs all the way through the semifinals, where it renewed the Federer rivalry, and obviously with it being the first match they'd played on clay ever since the advent of Federer's neo-backhand that had given him the upper hand on other surfaces, people were curious to see how that would translate onto clay. And I think in hindsight, the biggest takeaway from this match is obviously the hurricane-like conditions. However, I do think the performance by Rafa goes criminally underrated. After the first couple of games, it really seemed like only Federer was having to deal with the wind, because on the other side of the net, Nadal looked completely unaffected, which is crazy considering just how difficult those conditions would have been to play in, and yet it was vintage Nadal for much of it. A couple of spectacular backhand winners in particular, and in my opinion, a very underlooked special performance of Rafa's, especially when you consider Federer, even given the conditions, didn't play that badly himself. And then, of course, the final against Dominic Thiem. A lot of us at the time kind of had this final as a foregone conclusion because of the winner of the Djokovic-Thiem semi being on short rest, because the scheduling was just messed up that year, and because of the weather and all, they had to play 3 straight days, including the final. But nonetheless, I think for the first 2 sets, you could make a case that those were the best sets played in 2019. Those were extremely high quality. I think Thiem played easily his best French Open in 2019. And yet, the way he was playing out of his skin in the first 2 sets, Nadal still from a breakdown in the first one, 4 straight games to win that set like it was nothing. And Dominic really barely edged out that second set. From then on, I think you could make the case that fatigue kicked in for Thiem. His own intensity dropped, and understandably so. Nadal, for his part, his sky-high level continued, and he double breadsticked the next 2 sets for the title. There's no doubt the scheduling played its part for Thiem, but I have my doubts, even if he were 100%, that this would have gone beyond 4. We'll never know, but regardless, I still think very high-level fortnight from Rafa Nadal. Up next at number 7, I've got 2015 Stan Wawrinka. Now, everybody remembers this run for the absolutely flawless performance Stan put in the final, and that's for good reason, but his path to that final is a bit overlooked in my opinion. A lot of the times in Stan's deep runs at majors, you've seen him get off to slow starts and have to survive a couple of gritty matches early, only to end up playing his best tennis as he gets deeper into the tournament. That really wasn't the case at 2015 Roland Garros, where Stan, aside from 1 set dropped in the second round, he really was sharp throughout. So much so that in the quarterfinals, he was pretty much able to swat Roger Federer away like a fly. And mind you, this is a matchup that has swung Federer's way heavily throughout the duration of their head-to-head, and yet Stan really just overpowered him, and for the most part in that match really left it never in doubt. In fact, if I remember correctly, was not broken a single time in that one, and scored what was only a third career win against Roger all time, and then followed that up with a supremely clutch match against Jo-Wilfried Tsonga against, obviously, a partisan crowd. That semifinal saw Wawrinka save 16 of 17 break points, and obviously everyone knows that Joe, back in the day, really could be dangerous on any surface, and that semifinal was extremely tightly contested. Wawrinka did great to come out of that one, arguably his toughest match of the tournament, and then of course put in the performance that will define his career in the final against Novak Djokovic. This Wawrinka performance is probably what was the difference maker in Novak Djokovic not winning the Calendar Slam in 2015. Having gone through Rafa in the quarterfinals, it really seemed like this time it was Novak's to lose, and Wawrinka put in the performance of a lifetime to prevent it. That too from a set down. We all know how difficult it is to beat Djokovic from a set down in a slam final, no less. And he did it really just taking the racket out of Novak's hands. He bullied him in that final in ways that rarely anybody else has. It was going to take a special performance to beat Novak that day, and boy did it come in spades. This one really cemented Stan as the big-time, big-match player that he became late into his career, and would be higher, no doubt, if not for some video game Nadal runs ahead of it. Now, the run at number 6 I have been all over the place with. I used to think that it was easily the worst of Nadal's French Open titles. Keep in mind, this was back when he still had 9. Obviously, that's changed since, but I've definitely come around to this tournament run as it's aged. And said tournament run is, of course, Rafael Nadal at the 2011 French Open. Now, the reason I used to be so down on this tournament is very clear. In the first week, he was very rocky. He did not look as confident as, you typically see Nadal at Roland Garros. Even coming off some poor clay court seasons, he steps onto Chatrier, and stuff is just different. This year, through most of the first week, that was not the case. Obviously, first time he was ever taken 5 sets at Roland Garros against Isner in the first round. Isner, a very, very tough first round draw. The infamous Babolat balls used at the French Open in 2011 also probably played a part here with how they made play a lot speedier and seemed to benefit the big hitters and big servers. But when you're that great, we've seen over the years that conditions and stuff like that only makes so much of a difference, and Nadal, in spite of all that, taking all of it into account, was not very good in the first week and all the way up to his quarterfinal, really. Those last 3 matches of this tournament, however, are what saved this run for me. I didn't really take into account when I was down on this tournament just how difficult this draw was. Obviously already talked about Isner in the first round, but then Soderling in the quarterfinals, a top 5 player at that point who was the reigning 2-time French Open finalist, and he was throwing haymakers in that match and Nadal came through. Andy Murray back then, though not as established on clay, was still capable of playing some good stuff. In fact, he came really close to ending that Djokovic streak in Rome a couple weeks before this French Open, and Nadal handled him pretty well in the semifinals, played a very good match there, where Murray honestly didn't play particularly bad. And then the final against Federer. If you ask me, 2011 was probably the most impressive French Open Roger Federer has ever played, including the one that he actually won in 2009. Of course, played an absolutely vintage match in the semifinals to end that aforementioned Djokovic streak in 2011. And it really isn't like he played that much worse in the final. This might be Rafa's toughest French Open final ever, and That really wasn't on account of Nadal having a letdown in this final. More so, it was Federer continuing his excellent level throughout that tournament, and each of the first 3 sets were very, very tight. Could make a good argument Federer should have won the first. Rafa did very well to weather this storm, and only was able to create some daylight in the fourth, but otherwise this was a very high quality final. And as a whole, this is a contender for the hardest draw Nadal's ever had to navigate at the French Open, and so I think it deserves its spot here at number 6. Moving on, at number 5, I've got 2013 Rafael Nadal. 2013 Roland Garros saw Nadal return to Grand Slam glory in his first appearance at a major since 2012 Wimbledon. And much like my last spot on this list in 2011, this one did not come easy at all. In fact, in his first set of the tournament, he was punched in the mouth by Daniel Brands, who, I say without exaggeration, was literally attempting to recreate Robin Soderling 2009 fourth round against Nadal, because he was just hitting the cover off the ball in this match. That match, I actually think Nadal did a good job to weather the storm, but the following matches in the first week, he was well below par. In fourth round on, I think Nadal played much better. In my view, he really got right in the quarterfinals against Stan Wawrinka, ahead of another titanic clash with Novak Djokovic, which was highly anticipated given Novak had already that year ended Nadal's 8-year-long reign in Monte Carlo, and this semi was obviously one for the ages. Nadal put in a very clean performance in this one, probably should have won it in 4, and he ended up paying for not doing so, found himself down a break in the 5th. Much like the 2012 Australian Open final between these two, one flashpoint moment in that 5th ended up turning it. This time, Djokovic touching the net, up a break 4-3. That being said though, Nadal in this 5th set, his forehand went to a place that it rarely ever has, and that is a high compliment for the Nadal forehand of all ground strokes. Backed into a corner in this one, the Rafa forehand really went all out, nuclear in this one. I believe he ended up hitting 22 winners in all in this 5th set and came away with another extended famous 9-7 in the 5th victory. This match was more or less a quasi-final. David Ferrer, for how great he used to be on clay, Nadal had definitely passed his sternest test, and with all due respect, coming off that win, it seemed like it was never in doubt that Nadal was about to routine this final. His high level through the second week continued into the final. He ended up bullying Ferrer and took home what was at the time number 8 at Roland Garros. Number 4 features the very next year after 2013, and that is Rafael Nadal in 2014. Now, as the years have gone by, it's become more, regular, and we've become more used to Nadal taking some time during clay court season to really rev up to peak form. However, 2014 was the first time that had ever really happened since Rafa had become an elite player, and as a result, all the alarm bells were going off. He suffered some very uncharacteristic losses in Monte Carlo, Barcelona, Madrid. He was lucky to win given Nishikori really was having his way with him for a set and a half before ultimately his back went out. And then in Rome, Novak Djokovic was yet again able to beat him from a set down, and it really looked like this time Nadal wasn't going to be able to hold off the Djokovic challenge. For the first time, really, we went into a French Open where you could make a good argument that Nadal was not the number 1 clear-cut favorite. He really had not been the same player since his back injury early in 2014 at the Australian Open, and even though there was steady improvement through the clay season, there was nothing to indicate that he was about to put on the masterclass that he did over the next 2 weeks at Roland Garros. The best way I can describe 2014 was basically 2013, but the cleaner version. There were no early round struggles. He breezed through pretty much everybody. I will say easier opposition earlier in 2014, but nonetheless, Nadal was cruising. David Ferrer yet again fell victim in the quarterfinals to another battering. Coming off his win over Rafa in Monte Carlo, this time he was able to take the opening set, and he really woke up a sleeping bear, if you will, because what followed was 4-0-1. Finished that match with a flurry of forehand winners, something that was a trend throughout this tournament. Nadal's forehand arguably was as good as ever throughout this whole tournament. Followed it up with an absolute dismantling of Andy Murray. Yes, Murray was not at his best throughout 2014, but the performance was supreme nonetheless, and pre-metal hip era, you could probably count on your fingers how many times Murray has been on the losing end of a match that one-sided. And then this one could have only ended one way, with the two best players in the world facing off again in the final. I believe this was the first time Djokovic had ever dropped a Grand Slam final after winning the first set, and much like Wawrinka in 2015, Nadal in the 2014 final did it pretty much out-muscling Djokovic. Him on the might of his forehand. Again, this was arguably the best forehand tournament of Nadal's career. Not to say that the rest of his game was not exemplary as well, but his forehand really stood out here. Pretty much anything he was running around was turning to gold. And even though the heat ended up wearing down both players at the end, where Nadal kind of needed to drag himself across the finish line, overall I do think this is one of the most underrated tournaments of Nadal's career. Moving on, at number 3, we got 2010 Rafael Nadal. This was the first of 3 majors that Rafa captured in 2010, arguably the best year of his career. Having suffered his first ever defeat the prior year at the French Open, he was looking to recapture that throne, and I will say that the bulk of this French Open run was pretty much Rafael Nadal just cruising. He never really was required to go up a couple gears. This draw did unfold in a way where it didn't really require that of him, save an inspired Nicolas Almagro in the quarterfinals. Almagro in that match was throwing haymakers, and Rafa was throwing them back with interest. Against most people, that level would have gotten at least a set. Rafa, of course, is not most people, and he was not having it. Wrapped that up in a tight straight sets. Got through a surprise semifinalist in Jürgen Melzer. And then the final was really the only time in this tournament where he ramped up to his max capacity. In my opinion, he really peaked for this final. Obviously had the chip on his shoulder losing to Soderling to have his first ever defeat at Roland Garros the previous year. Those two had a couple of chippy moments throughout their rivalry, and well, Rafa was just on a mission to get revenge this year. Never really gave Soderling a chance in this one. This was a clinic in the final, and in doing so, Rafael Nadal captured his first major in over a year, and with this just tremendous clay court season and French Open, without dropping a set for the second time, he really set him up for the gargantuan year that was to come. Coming in at the number 2 spot, we got 2017 Rafael Nadal. Now, if you've watched this channel enough over the past year, I'm sure that you can probably come to the conclusion that I am completely opposed to the notion that the big 3 have gotten better as they've aged, they've gotten better than ever as they've gotten older. And I, of course, am diametrically opposed to this viewpoint. I will take the prime years any day, and ultimately I just think there's only so much that you can compensate to make up for components of the game that are diminished or lost as you get older. But there do come those tournaments every now and then where they kind of throw back the clock, and 2017 Roland Garros was definitely that for Rafael Nadal. Regardless of age, regardless of who he played, this is a run that will stand up to just about any in his career. This was another one where he seemingly had a chip on his shoulder to reclaim his title and ultimately break a drought of going slamless for 3 years. Of course, by the time the French Open had come at this point, we knew that Nadal was back and had broken out of that slump. However, even having had a dominant clay season that year, none of us were prepared for the level up that we were about to see during these 2 weeks in Paris. Rafa, utterly dominant throughout the fortnight, had that infamous 0-1-0 match against Basilashvili, and it's not really like anybody else did all that much better throughout the 2 weeks. In fact, by the numbers, this was the most dominant French Open title run Nadal has ever had. Fewest amount of games, dropped 35 throughout all 7 matches, albeit there was a retirement in there from PCB. However, realistically, he was not adding on to that tally all that much, and after crushing the guy that was supposed to be his biggest challenger in the semis in Dominic Thiem, the final, if you can believe it, saw Nadal's level rise even one more notch. Stan Wawrinka had looked good throughout this tournament, and again, we talked about it earlier, he'd become such a great big match player. Nobody could have been prepped for the absolute battering that went down in that final, and in this match, Nadal was doing absolutely whatever he wanted. He was hitting winners from positions that seemed insurmountable, cracking the ball off of both wings, and truly this was one of the best matches of his career. Even taking into account post-prime and whatnot, on this day he was as good as any. And finally, up top, we got 2012 Rafael Nadal. I think on these lists, typically, there is that one performance that really just leaves it very clear-cut. I felt that way about the Australian Open video I did, and I feel that same way now with the Roland Garros champs of the decade. Nadal's 2012 Roland Garros run has a claim to be arguably his best French Open run ever. After basically a whole year of coming up second to one guy in Novak Djokovic, 2012 saw Rafael Nadal really push back for the first time, lost the Australian Open final by a hair, and then on clay, he really brought a level on clay that was as high as any in his storied career on the surface. The early round saw the usual blowout city. First match of the second week against Juan Monaco, who was probably in the peak of his career at that point, and quite the competent clay court player at that, but Rafael Nadal scored 17 straight games to beat him 2-0-0. And keep in mind, to win a full tennis match in straights, it's winning 18 games. Just think about that. He won 17 games in a row going away to win this match. Nico Almagro in the quarterfinals, again another very competent clay court player, offered the best resistance en route to the final as he did in 2010. And then in the semifinals, poor David Ferrer again was victim to the first of 3 blowout losses at the hands of Rafael Nadal at Roland Garros in what was probably his best stretch at the tournament. This one in particular, it seemed like Nadal just could do whatever he wanted. He was in a special zone, won a point sitting down, won a point literally defending all corners of the court, ultimately to just hit a blistering forehand pass up the line. And then the final with Novak Djokovic. These two played as well as you could in conditions like that. Yes, it was a bit of a patchy match, but in my opinion, they played as well as the conditions allowed for them, and Djokovic, in stretches of this match, was truly the embodiment of almost his 2011 self, I would say. He was so good, he ran off 8 games in a row when this match looked like a foregone conclusion, down 2 sets and a break in the third. Went up a break in the fourth before rain caused this match to be postponed to the next day. Upon resumption, the high standard continued from both, Rafa ultimately edging it 7-5 in the fourth. Broke a tie with Bjorn Borg for most French Open titles all time. Was undisputedly one of the best tournaments of his career. And that will bring the curtain down on my list ranking the 2010s Roland Garros champions. I'm sure many of you have different lists yourself. If you do, feel free to drop them below in the comments, or just any changes you would make to mine. I would be very interested in reading them. Otherwise, I know this has been a long one. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed. If you did, it would be much appreciated if you could drop a like, help this video perform better in YouTube's algorithm, and subscribe to the channel if you're not already. Thank you so much for watching again, and of course, I will see y'all in the next one.